IREN stock has spent the past week under heavy pressure. Dilution, sentiment shifts, and short-term trading flows have completely dominated the conversation. But this weekend, as we look toward next week's trade, something interesting is starting to happen. The market has become so focused on the financing event that it has almost forgotten the single most important catalyst for this company. And that, of course, is IREN's AI cloud partnership with Microsoft. In today's video, I want to reposition the entire narrative back toward where the long-term thesis truly sits. Because next week could be the moment when attention finally shifts back to what matters most. The question now becomes simple. Will the Microsoft narrative re-enter the conversation, and if it does, what does that mean for IREN stock going forward? To understand why this is such a pivotal moment, we need to appreciate the difference between news flow and fundamentals. News flow is what everyone reacts to in the short term. It's emotional. It's chaotic. It's the thing that makes a stock swing 8% in either direction based on a single headline. Fundamentals, on the other hand, describe what a company is actually building. They determine where stock is likely to be 6 months or 12 months from now. And when it comes to IREN, the Microsoft partnership belongs firmly in that second category. It is fundamental. It is structural. And it is transformative. The last week has been dominated by dilution fear, price retracements, and traders positioning around the equity raise. But beneath that noise, nothing about the Microsoft agreement has changed. Microsoft still needs massive amounts of AI compute. Demand for GPU infrastructure continues to grow at a pace that almost no one predicted. And hyperscalers around the world are scrambling to expand capacity. That's the environment IREN is building into. What's fascinating is that sometimes the market temporarily forgets about a key catalyst during periods of fear. We saw it earlier this year with several AI infrastructure names. For weeks, investors focused on macro conditions, rates, or sector rotations, only to realize later that the company's execution hadn't slowed down at all. When sentiment finally came back around, those stocks re-rated sharply. IREN may be entering a similar moment now. The stock has been punished, but the catalyst pipeline remains intact. And next week, the conversation may begin shifting back in that direction. One of the key things that could bring the Microsoft story back into focus is the next phase of infrastructure deployment. Investors will be watching closely for any update, even a small one, that suggests progress on capacity expansion or GPU installation timelines. The AI cloud build-out is capital-heavy, high-growth, and deeply tied to long-term recurring revenue. That's exactly the type of narrative that markets want to return to once the dust settles from a financing event. If next week brings even a hint of forward movement on the AI side of the business, sentiment could shift quickly. Another factor that could reignite interest is simply the structure of the partnership. When you look at the broader AI landscape, the companies that have secured hyperscaler relationships tend to trade with a valuation premium because it signals demand durability. It tells the market that this company isn't just selling compute capacity into an uncertain environment. It is building alongside one of the largest and fastest-growing AI ecosystems on the planet. That is why the Microsoft narrative has so much potential power for IREN. It validates the long-term business model and supports future revenue scaling. There is also a psychological element here. Retail investors love catalyst stories. They love the idea that next week, next month, or the next quarter could be the turning point. And with IREN, the Microsoft partnership is that story. It is the anchor of the bull thesis and the reason many investors see beyond short-term volatility. When attention inevitably rotates back toward that catalyst, the stock often catches a bid. Whether that happens next week depends on how quickly market psychology resets. But here's what stands out. Dilution fear eventually exhausts itself. Markets cannot stay focused on a financing event forever. At some point, traders start asking bigger questions. They start thinking about revenue, growth, execution, strategic partnerships. And that's when the Microsoft narrative comes roaring back. If next week marks that shift, IREN could see a very different type of price action, one rooted in fundamentals rather than fear. As we move into next week's trading sessions, there are a few things worth watching closely. First, volume patterns. If buyers begin stepping in on higher than average volume, especially during midday periods, that often signals a transition from panic-driven selling to accumulation. Second, the way the stock behaves around key support levels. If selling begins to flatten out and the price stabilizes, it can open the door for a narrative reversal. Third, any industry news surrounding GPU demand, AI training workloads, or hyperscaler build-outs could indirectly benefit sentiment toward IREN. The technical setup will also matter. If the stock begins to reclaim lost levels, traders will interpret that as a sign the worst of the financing-related pressure may be behind us. A relief bounce is always possible after a sharp decline, but for IREN, that bounce could be strengthened by the re-emergence of the Microsoft story. When fundamentals and technicals align, momentum tends to build quickly. Looking further ahead, the next 6 to 12 months are likely to be defined by a massive expansion cycle in AI data infrastructure. Hyperscalers are scaling aggressively. GPU clusters are becoming the backbone of everything from chatbot training to enterprise AI deployment. The companies that can supply compute capacity into this tidal wave of demand are extremely well positioned. And that is where the Microsoft partnership becomes such a powerful long-term asset for IREN. It is not just a customer. It is a megatrend partner. Right now, the market is repositioning. Short-term volatility has overshadowed long-term vision. But if next week brings even a small shift in narrative, if investors begin talking again about Microsoft, about GPU deployment, about AI infrastructure, then sentiment toward IREN could improve rapidly. Sometimes, all it takes is one press mention, one industry update, or one analyst comment to pull investor attention back toward the real catalysts. This weekend sets the stage. The story is ready. The pieces are in place. The market's job next week is to decide which narrative to follow: the fading memory of a dilution event, or the forward-looking potential of AI infrastructure built alongside one of the most influential tech companies in the world. As long as the partnership stands, as long as the AI cycle accelerates, and as long as IREN continues executing, the long-term thesis remains intact. So heading into next week, the real question is simple: will Microsoft re-enter the conversation? If it does, the tone around this entire stock could shift dramatically. And many investors may look back on this moment and realize the market had briefly forgotten the most important part of the story. Next week could be when that story comes back into focus.